Hello everyone and welcome to our conversation about bespoke shoemaking. I'd like to say a big thank you to the Company of Cordwainers for supporting this and also to Carreducker for hosting us. Today we're going to have a talk with a deliberately provocative title of What's the Point of Bespoke? Which I think is hopefully going to bring in some really interesting views about the different aspects of bespoke shoemaking and about where it is today, where it's going in the future. We have also deliberately gathered to hear a group of different shoemakers, different backgrounds and very different styles to create some kind of diversity in the conversation, which I think will be really interesting. So I'm going to just leave everyone to introduce themselves and go around the table one by one.
Hello, my name is Dominic Casey. I'm a bespoke shoemaker based in London. I run a last making business called Last Maker House in Eastbourne, and I'm a livery member of the Cordwainers company.
Hi there, I'm Felix Jouanneau. I make bespoke American workwear style boots in East London.
Hello, my name is James Ducker. I'm co-founder and director of Carreducker. We're bespoke shoemakers based in London, and we also run a shoemaking and leatherwork school, which is where we are now.
Hi, my name's Sebastian Tarek. I'm a bespoke shoemaker based in Arnold Circus area of East London, where I work as a freelance outworker for some of the West End firms, as well as a fairly small business that I run under my own name.
Hi, my name's James Kearns. I make bespoke trainers and work boots for the avant-garde genre, based in East London.
Super, thank you very much everybody. Right, well seeing as we started with a very provocative title, let's talk about the trade. Is the trade of bespoke shoemaking dying, James? What's your view?
Well, I mean, if you look around the table, the variety of makers here would suggest that it isn't. And I think if you look around the country, there are bespoke makers of all sorts of constructions and ways of doing it, and I think it's certainly not dying. You might say that West End shoemaking is niche because of the price point, but there's plenty of other people making shoes of all different sorts all around the country.
Do you think in the time you've been making shoes, for example, has that grown? Is there much more variety of shoemakers and bespoke now than there used to be?
I'm not sure. I'm certainly more aware of them. It might be just my kind of evolution as a shoemaker and knowledge, but I think it's much easier to get knowledge these days with the internet, and communications are much easier. So I think it's easier to find out what's going on around the world even.
Do you see kind of lots of different types of shoemakers in the area that you're in, and is that kind of easier to kind of learn about things and see how people because of the internet?
I mean, there's quite a lot, like there's now the beauty of Instagram where everyone can upload their own images and it's really easy to use, and so you can find out quite a lot about what's going on in the world, and there's various other shoemakers that kind of want to take their own path and really kind of find their own niche and what they like doing. So they don't really feel the need to have to be like, right, I'm going to be a bespoke shoemaker, I'm going to make classic West End shoes. They can still apply the same techniques and get a really nicely made shoe, but in a different style.
Because they're kind of encouraged by seeing all these other things around the world and see other people doing things.
There's lots
I mean,
of
I'd have to say that I think that if you can choose to go down a path of learning how to make shoes, traditionally you only had a fairly focused pathway that you could take, as you were describing. Say, for instance, getting an apprenticeship with Mobs and becoming sort of a very classical West End shoemaker. If you can get to a certain point and then decide that you're going to diverge quite dramatically as you have, there must be a fairly large audience for consumption of bespoke shoes. So in terms of the kind of point of, is bespoke shoemaking a diminishing trade, clearly there's a big audience. It might not be as big as maybe it was, say, 30, 40 years ago, but it's clearly a resurgent audience, I'd have to say.
Yeah, it's not that it's not as big, it's just changing. The variety of shoemakers, if you look around this table, from James, Sebastian, Felix, there's a huge range of types of shoes being made. So bespoke is thriving and growing as always, and people are just choosing to have different types of things made for them, rather than it's broadening out, rather than the classic type of
So we're all taking classical methodology to produce the finished article, but it's coming from different backgrounds. I mean, for myself, I wasn't classically trained, so I have no classical skills of kind of this is how you're supposed to make a pair of shoes.
So how did you learn shoemaking then?
Well, I learned myself through YouTube videos.
Oh, really?
So understanding that there's sort of 3 or 4 different ways to make a pair of shoes, and then finding what ways work for the product that I wanted to produce, and taking it to another step further. So it's not only diversifying as a product and what's on the market now, is also the leather that's being used for it. So traditionally you get the leather from the tannery or you get it from a supplier. you know, in that finished colour effectively, and you simply make the product and present it to the client. Whereas now, certainly on my side, I'm doing a lot more treatments in-house. I'm, you know, purchasing natural tan, natural tan leathers, and then I'm doing the processing myself, offering, you know, a limitless sort of supply of colours and finishes to that leather.
And I think from both James and my perspective as people who actually teach shoemaking as well, we either teach last making or shoemaking, the number of young people actually coming into the industry is terribly exciting. It's expanding. You know, we have people come from all over the world to come and study last making down in Eastbourne. And it's really interesting what James says is that people have taught themselves from YouTube. They turn up with a completely different perspective on how to make shoes. That's really exciting. You know, they actually have, you know, various techniques, and they're looking at leather in a different way. So the whole thing is very rich, bubbling away underneath the surface.
And do you think that those young people coming to learn it, do they fully appreciate the amount of time and things that kind of involved in getting to a certain level to be able to do it very well? I think it's a challenge.
Once they spend a week with me, exactly. Once they spend a week with me, we try and persuade them not to resign early. You know, don't give up. You know,
well, I think there's lots of people who start by themselves and they watch YouTube and blogs and various things, but there's a bit of a gap between that and then establishing yourself as a professional like you've done, and that requires a certain personality and a certain perseverance and a certain kind of mindset, because you have to be really, really single-minded about it, because you have to put loads of hours in, you have to do a lot of work, and it's not that easy.
Yeah, I think people need to give themselves at least 5 years to even get to a point where they're happy to, you know, produce a product to a finished level that they're willing to sort of sell at a price that warrants the amount of hours they put into it.
And is that how long you really need before you can even diverge into a different kind of style and do something different? Because that's the basics of the last making and doing stitching to a certain level.
I mean, I always maintained that I would never refer to myself as a shoemaker until I had 10 years under my belt. And actually, upon reaching that point and passing it, I realised I was probably short by about 20.
Exactly.
It really is. Actually, how long is a piece of string? I mean,
we're all lifetime learners, aren't we?
Exactly.
You know, we're all just beginning.
Which is one of the most beautiful things about shoemaking, is that there is an inherent humility in the craft. And I think particularly in something like bespoke shoemaking, where perhaps in manufacturing shoes which you wholesale to someone else and there's a third party which sells them for you, you never have to confront the reality of the shortcomings of your...
from it,
completely. And I think if you can't prostrate yourself in front of a client and say, I'm sorry that you seem to be experiencing some discomfort, sir, and explain how that you will resolve this issue, then I think you're going to have a very short career.
And it feels like, I know we were kind of talking about this briefly earlier, that's one of the reasons that bespoke is so strong, is because there's so many different ways you might get into it and might like it. One of them with like a fine, you know, just normal Oxford West End dress shoe might be just the fit and the kind of refinements of it, but actually someone else might not care at all about the fit, and it might be just about the customization and the creative process, right? So they're coming to you for a completely different reason, and it feels like with everyone here, people are often coming to for that particular look. So it's customization, but it's also kind of I buy into your look and I want to customize it as well.
I mean, I think you have quite a finite breadth of upper styles that you can do. And so how you differentiate, you know, like I want a pair of Oxfords, sure. How do you make a black pair of Oxfords look different between, say, how all of us might potentially make them? Predominantly it will be sort of the materials that you use in order to do it.
And I think that's the uniqueness, and what's really interesting about bespoke is the uniqueness and the individuality of it. You look around the table here and you've got individual makers making very different, they're all making bespoke, they're all making stuff that's handmade, and they're all working individually on their own, but they're making individual products for a client who is essentially a unique individual as well. So it's very much tailored specifically towards what the client wants.
Each customer that you get has an input into what the final shoe looks like. So you know, you have to be really sensitive to what they're saying, and then there's lots of interpretation. It's a kind of two-way process, and that's part of the experience of getting their shoes, is that they create it with you, and so every time it's going to look different.
Yeah, because the interaction there is kind of part of the joy as well. Felix, and you said you switched from doing sort of slightly dressier shoes to kind of the boot side, was that driven just by yourself, or was it also kind of interaction, you seeing clients or friends just saying, actually, I wanted that kind of
So I
boot?
kind of started making, working for a company called T&F Shoemakers, making colourful brogues and things like that, which obviously wasn't very me. And then, because I've always been into riding motorcycles and things like that, I always started making shoes for myself and what I kind of liked. So it kind of like was driven by what I kind of admired in shoes, and then the whole like 1940s, 50s kind of Western style boots played like a really big influence into the stuff that I make right now.
Did any of you have that same kind of experience of other friends just sort of seeing what you had or what you're making, and then it just kind of growing slowly like that?
I mean, I think in a city which has a fair amount of saturation of option, ultimately, how do you differentiate yourself from, other firms, your peers, things like that? And I think, I always want to try and make a pair of shoes that I would wear. The personal becomes very, very important as you start to go beyond just replicating other people's wishes completely.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting kind of variation, isn't it? Because I think, again, around the table there's variation there that I think someone like James, for example, is more likely to, you're still going to turn some customers away who want something you're just never going to make, but you're more likely to make things that are a more greater range of shoes for different types of customer. Whereas someone like James, people are going to him for a very particular look, and actually it's mostly about just colours and little design points, right?
Yes.
And somebody kind of more in between. So like Sebastian, you have a particular look, but maybe still going to vary it a little bit if that's what the kind of customer wants. So it feels like that's another strength of bespoke. Some people can be entirely design led by you, or actually much less design, have their own views, and yet you can kind of fill all those kind of gaps as well.
At the end, I think what's quite important is you own your own company. Essentially, you're putting out your name, so you have to make something that you're proud of.
Yeah.
And you're like, right, I've spent 2 weeks flat out just doing this shoe. This is my pride and joy. Here you go. And if you're not proud of that, then what's the point?
It's that one-to-one with the product and then with the customer.
Yeah.
Once you develop that relationship with the client, they've made that investment. They might not necessarily be someone who is particularly predisposed to going shopping. But they need a pair of shoes, and so they come to see you because they see that you can fulfill that brief for them. Once they've made that establishment, you're now obliged, like a marriage, through the duration of their sartorial lives, to outfit them for everything that they want.
Plus, you know their foot better than anyone else. So why would you get anybody else to make a pair of shoes for?
Yeah, but somebody did ask me for a pair of engineers' boots, and I did refer them to Felix. I said, do you know what? That's not what you need to go and talk to that guy.
But we're getting customers coming to us wanting various things, and we don't always have to make a hand-welted leather-soled shoe. You can hand-last something and then cement it and get it sent off and have it machine stitch soled. Or if they don't want to spend £3,000 upwards on a leather-soled shoe, they want something else, but they're not. So you have to give them that variety and that kind of chance.
And there is quite a lot of choice and variety, and obviously the very labour-intensive get the price, and the cheaper. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make the shoe gonna fall apart after a few years. Still gonna have a lot of integrity and made well. All of us are going to be, say, releasing this product, so we know it's going to last. We're putting our integrity into belief of that.
I think that's actually maybe one of the kind of like clearer divisions between how you and I work. I would only do that kind of thing that you're describing after I've done a full hand-sewn, welted leather-soled shoe.
Well, that's what. We do that. We initially have to make the last and get the first shoe done, and then afterwards. No, not on the first one. Probably not. So we go through the whole fitting process, and get the last right, and from there they can have pretty much what they want. I mean, we've recently done a kind of unstructured, unlined leather. Essentially a slipper, and a much lower price, and our bespoke customers love them. People are ordering two and three pairs, and so they can have them in their various houses around the place.
And actually
just
it's
great, and I really like doing it because it's different. You have different challenges when you're making it, and they're happy, which is kind of what you want.
And when you're learning when you do something different like that, there must be some technical challenge within there you've got to learn to do for the first time. Are you asking people about that, or you going to academic people?
Dominic! I've got a question. Can you talk? It's invariably you try and find someone that you've worked with previously who you trust their opinion, and even if they don't know the answer specifically, you want them either to lie to you convincingly,
or just you full of confidence as well.
I'll just tell them, so, you'll be fine, Felix. Don't worry. I'm sure it'll fit.
So one thing that has changed since I started is that people are willing to share information.
Yeah.
Like when I started off, people would hide their techniques, and I mean Tony Slinger in Yorkshire, he said when he was training they would turn their backs if they were doing something that they developed, and they would not share it. But our philosophy right from the word go was like, share it, get the information out there. Our blog, we gave it away, and people said, well, why are you doing that? And we said, because we want to encourage people to get on and do it and help people, and it's quite a collegiate kind of atmosphere now, and you can just phone people up and say, you know, have you ever done this, how does this work, you know, help me out, and people do.
I find it's oddly a very cultural thing. Like different places have very different attitudes to it.
I moved back here in 2003. I had a letter of introduction to lobs, and I met one of the lob family who very generously gave me his time, and I said, you know, my intention is to come here for a year, perhaps for 2 years, depending on what my income will allow, and I'd like to sort of, you know, learn as much as I can from him, and then I'm going to go back to Australia. And he just looked at me sort of gobsmacked, like, why would I do that? I remember at the time thinking, this man's grasp of economics is clearly very poor. I have some skills I'm willing to give you for free, but I had no appreciation of just how much was involved in the process of learning how to make shoes properly.
And perhaps that work, but he knows in the back of his head it's going to be 5 years, this guy. Or it's going to be 2 years before he's really going to be able to contribute anything to what we can do. That's just the point. And why do you think that's changed in the last 10, 20 years, that people are much more collaborative and willing to share? Is that partly to do with social media, like everyone's just seeing what everyone else is doing anyway?
Information leaks out, it's going to be out there. So why hide it? And where's the next generation going to come from unless people like us help them?
Because I think maybe 20 years ago the industry was contracting. So there has been a contraction of sorts, and I think it is people sort of like Carreducker and the democratisation that the internet has provided, which almost become responsible for ensuring that these crafts can't shrink. So
you started with that question about kind of whether bespoke shoemaking was dying, which clearly it's not, but anyway, it's a good question. I like those kind of, there's different benefits of bespoke that might bring people in and kind of help support it. We talked about the fit, we talked about kind of like the customization. Another one is definitely that kind of relationship we talked about with a customer, and being their kind of shoemaker for a long period of time. Do you think that's still as strong as it used to be, but because people have almost so much choice that they're less likely to have that long-term relationship?
Particularly initially, my client base as I developed worked in creative fields. So quite a lot of photographers, chefs, people like that, and they're not necessarily people who are naturally inclined to leather-soled shoes. Sure. So you might get someone who might have one pair, then maybe at a pinch would have a second pair, but they've also got, you know, 2 pairs of trainers, a pair of hiking boots.
What's it like in sneakers, James?
I do have quite a lot of returning customers, but quite often it's either because they want it to wear for a specific event, like say Burning Man, or to wear with a certain sort of set of their wardrobe. So it's kind of quite specific for not necessarily occasion, but for certain looks.
People at the moment are really kind of starting to admire craft and really enjoy watching it. And I think people may not be able to afford a pair of bespoke shoes, but want a bespoke shoe. So they'll save up a lot of money and be like, right, I don't want to own 50 pairs of trainers. I just want one really nice, well-made shoe that's going to last me, and it doesn't have to be stylish or fashionable. It just has to go with my outfits that I wear most days, and just blends seamlessly into that.
Guys ride bikes or whatever, then actually there's less variation, because that's kind of what they're thinking, right?
You can just kind of wear almost the same shoe every single day.
It's not sort of my style, so I don't really know it very well, but I kind of feel like if you're on the kind of dressier kind of West End spectrum, there's more of a sense that you might want lots of different shoes and lots of different tailoring, and you like mixing it up and kind of be expressive, whereas actually more on the kind of workwear end, it's more about good clothes that last well and really practical and wear. So actually having just 1 or 2 pairs of boots is kind of, you know, is the point, because you have like that one leather jacket and everything else, right?
And you want to see the wear.
Yeah.
And this is sort of maybe one of those kind of particular sort of divergences that, you know, for Felix's clients, they want their boots to look very worn in, almost from the very beginning. You know, whereas obviously you'd like your shoes to look fairly smart and kind of well kept.
One guy actually came in and said that he wears all his shoes, like I think it was 5 times, or wears them for like a month, and then gives them to his valet. And like, no, that's completely the wrong way around. Like traditionally, like an English aristocrat would give them to his valet to wear in, and then give them to him when they're actually wearable. And like they do it completely the wrong way around.
I find that really, because I still work for some of the West End firms, and sometimes when you get a pair of shoes, it's quite clear. It's like, well, so I have 1 pair of lasts here, I have 5 pairs of uppers, and they're all exactly the same. Why am I making this gentleman 5 pairs of shoes? And then the workshop manager will politely tell you that, well, there's 1 pair for his house in the Bahamas, there's 1 for his house here. It's like,
So you can travel light.
Travel light.
Because that is the ultimate
like the rest
luxury.
of us.
Another kind of customer we often get is what I call bespoke junkies, who you start making and you have the conversation, and then they slip into the conversation. Oh yes, well I've had my lob shoes and I've been to Clevin, I've been here, and they basically just try everyone, and I think they just love it. It's not the final shoes that motivates them; it's the doing it.
You know, probably my best client. He's a stylist. When I first met him, he was in the process of having a pair of shoes that he bought that he was having renovated. Foster's were making him a pair, Clevs were making him a pair, and then I was, and it was a bit like, he'd actually been a big Carol Christian Puel fan and had sold all of his to start investing in his new him, essentially. So he put it into bespoke footwear. And he still, like, occasionally buys some old stuff, might have it done up, but then he'll put it on eBay and he'll make back enough for the deposit for his next pair of bespoke shoes.
Trade it in and get the new model.
Is fit less of a drive with like a working boot, for example?
No,
Is there more variation or not?
Like you probably could get away with less of a strict fit, but I still make it my focal point. So at each of my customers, I take all their measurements, do them a fitting shoe, and make them a last. Because most work boots, they're built quite tough, really thick leathers and things like that, so they're a lot harder to break in. Whereas if you have a bespoke fit, you're taking away like a month of pain into 2-3 wears, warm everything up, sole starts flexing, and they're perfect.
Was it you who saying had a military client who like soaked his shoes and boots in the bath or something?
Soaked it in the bath, put some plastic bags on it, and they'll just mould to your foot.
And that was because he couldn't find, he was trying to buy ready-to-wear boots, right?
Ready-to-wear boots,
they were all
just
too narrow
wouldn't
for
fit.
him.
Just wouldn't fit.
Felix, he has to be technically just as accurate as anybody, probably more so when he's making pull-on boots to stop them slipping up and down in the heel.
I
mean, technically
that's
they
like
have to be
for the first time.
exactly. It's like everything is in the loafer. You've got to work with the actual pulling on, the slip of the heel. So you have to be really precise making those types of boots, as well as French calfskin. In the West End, we can get away with endless mishaps and bits and pieces,
And
really.
And getting the fit right is also part of the pleasure of shoemaking.
Yeah,
it's one of the. It's problem solving. It's working things out, and that's part of the joy of what we do. And I wouldn't want to give that up. I wouldn't want to just make. I mean, we have made shoes on standard lasts. That we started off doing that, but actually, the bespoke side of it, part of the joy is actually making them fit.
It's a key part of the interaction, isn't it? You can email in a request for what you want in terms of sort of design, but I need to feel your feet. I need to sort of see. I need to give you a bit of a squeeze while they're on to ascertain why it is that your fifth phalanges is hurting a little bit and that sort of thing. I think in the broader kind of expanded sort of bespoke world that we've kind of discussed quite a bit, there is perhaps a sliding rule of fit expectation. And so potentially from time to time I will have a client who's never had a bespoke pair of shoes made, who in theory I possibly could, not necessarily cut corners, but if I hadn't managed to realise the fit as accurately as I best would, I could maybe get away with, whereas if it was a West End client, they'd throw them back in my face. And also, like I have, my business is split between sort of the UK and Japan, and I mean, Japanese, you just can't get away with shit. It's an exhausting task trying to recognise something for, probably one of the more particular craft-oriented cultures with really, really unusual feet by Western standards. So that in itself just throws up a lot of problems and kind of.
And are they very knowledgeable about shoes and shoemaking, or is it just very demanding?
I think it's the frightening thing about the Japanese clientele is their eye for detail. It knows no bounds, and they will see things that I just like. I mean, I'm flabbergasted. Yes, you're right. I will take this back and rectify this thing that I just didn't know was there. I'm so sorry. But it's still. I mean, the people that come and see me in Tokyo are still the kind of people, relatively speaking, that might come and see me here. So they aren't necessarily kind of classic bespoke clients.
Is that easy with sneakers because they're coming to you for a particular look anyways? It's more kind of like, I just want.
And my main
your
design is predominantly a lot of laces at the front, which offers so much versatility.
So do you make a bespoke last or generally, or you?
No, I haven't done. Although I am currently working on a fully bespoke pair that had a last fully measured up and made at the moment, but that's actually my first one.
But will that radically change the look of the final sneaker?
No, not really. It's just more to do with the instep, and the soling is a totally different sole that I would use, but it's using my upper. So that's the kind of adaptation that I do of taking, say, my classic upper sort of style with the laces and the eyelets, and then attaching that to a standard sort of work boot sole, or put your hand in, you can feel wherever your toes go, and that only takes sort of a month.
And the difference, me and James Kearns, most of our clients would wear their shoes quite heavily. Like they're going to go and take them out and like have a thrashing, whereas say a bespoke pair of shoes from U3 will be a lot finer, bit more classic and a bit more finished and polished.
They'd be sat in a restaurant as opposed to going to a gig.
Someone's going to put shoe trees in at the end of every day and really look after, polish them, whereas most of my clients...
No shoes!
No, man, I don't want to deal with that.
I like to get a shoe back that's all battered up. It means they've worn them, and which is what, at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want them to wear them and love them and kind of... That's
and as we always say, you never know if the shoe's working until it's come back for its first long sole and heel.
Yeah.
Until it's been worn for and lived in and loved for a bit. That's when you really know that you've done your job as a bespoke shoemaker. So look, when the repairs used to come in, the one thing that we wanted to see was how was the shoe being worn, what was actually happening on the inside.
My one true regret in the field that I've chosen to work in is that I would love it to be more democratically priced, but the truth is I tried to make it at what I saw as a more affordable price, and I just didn't do as good a job. It's a very, very labour-intensive process.
We've only got a few minutes left. Maybe are there any other ways that people see the industry changing? Like people wanting more priority on comfort, on sustainability of materials, on, I don't know, fit in orthopedics or anything like that? Is that changing with the kind of people's priorities?
The insides are getting softer. I think people are so used to wearing trainers and shoes that they can get in the shop and walk out in and spend a day walking.
So what is that actually physically in the inside? Is that a thinner like toe puff or whatever, or what is it, or less structured? What is? How do you soften it up?
We use sort of foam inserts and
like a memory foam kind of thing. Because
the footbed, and also on the top line we started putting in little foam fillets between the lining and the upper, just to because people just aren't used to a really rigid shoe, and classic West End shoes are really rigid and you have to break them in slowly. Yeah. And they do soften. They become amazingly comfortable and soft and lovely, but it takes a while and people aren't used to it.
And that's what I've moved into recently is softening up, say a classic Derby, but because of the properties of the culotta that I'm using, I haven't bothered lining it, put a toe puff in, put a heel counter in. The leather's about 2 to 3 millimeters thick. It's got so much rigidity in it. It holds its shape. Yeah. And then it feels like a slipper instantly because there's nothing really sort of keeping the foot in. So you're not going to be able to do that with most of what's used for classic footwear.
I was trained to make shoes that would last 30 years. And obviously they're robust and strong and rigid because they have to be to last that long. Yeah. But what you're sacrificing is the longevity of the shoe.
I mean, we live in an age of throwaway culture. The idea that these shoes might last me 5 years is like, look after them. You'll get double, triple that. Just take care of your shoes and they'll last. And that, in and of itself, is quite mind-boggling for a lot of clients.
The great thing about having clients who've been buying shoes for 30 years is you go into their wardrobes and there's a history of bespoke making there, and you think, well, that's amazing. These guys turn up wearing a pair of shoes, they're 25 years old, or 30 years old, and they're asking for another pair to be made, and they may be my generation, what the shoes are going to see you out, you're going to be going before the shoes are.
No, I think it's quite nice to have, obviously I make quite a strong, robust product that when I leave this world, I will still have a shoe or something there that I made. And I think that's quite a nice thing to...
Legacy.
Yeah, legacy.
Yeah. On that note, I think we have to wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody. It was a fantastic discussion. That was really good. Thanks for all your points. And you know, I think we managed to kind of have everybody's kind of different views and styles kind of really kind of contribute to the conversation. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks very much.